The Epistle to the Hebrews is one of the most beautifully constructed texts in the New Testament. It's also one of the most misunderstood because almost everything its traditional title tells you is wrong. It's not an epistle. It's probably not written to Hebrews, and it's definitely not by Paul. 3 corrections from a single title. Strip those away, and what you'll find underneath is a sermon, one of the most sophisticated rhetorical performances in the ancient world. Once you see how it's built, the text transforms entirely. The author tells us the genre directly. In chapter 13, verse 22, the text calls itself a word of exhortation, a standard term for a sermon or homily. The body of Hebrews is oral rhetoric, carefully structured arguments, recurring exhortations to the audience, dramatic deployment of scripture. The letter-like closing in chapter 13, greetings, blessings, personal notes, is tacked on at the end, but the form of the work is a speech, not correspondence. Hebrews reads like a sermon because it is one. The Pauline letters in the New Testament are arranged by decreasing lengths. Romans first, the short letter to Philemon last. Hebrews is a long document, so when it was attributed to Paul, it's slotted into that sequence based on word count, landing between 1 Corinthians and 2 Corinthians. The attribution was never in the text. No one named Paul appears anywhere in Hebrews, but the Pauline label likely secured the book's place in the canon, a controversial text accepted on borrowed authority. 4 candidates have been proposed over the centuries, and none has a strong case. Luke, the physician and companion of Paul, wrote high-quality Greek, and Hebrews has some of the most polished Greek in the New Testament. Apollos, described in Acts as a gifted rhetorician from Alexandria, fits a text that's a rhetorical masterpiece. Barnabas, whose name means son of encouragement, matches a text that calls itself a word of encouragement. And Prisca, a prominent early church leader, would make Hebrews the only New Testament book potentially authored by a woman. Each proposal rests on a single suggestive parallel. None rests on direct evidence. The church father Origen settled the debate in the 3rd century with characteristic honesty. God knows who the author of Hebrews is. The verdict still stands. Whoever the author was, they were steeped in a particular intellectual tradition. In the ancient world, educated readers didn't always take sacred texts at face value. Greek philosophers read Homer's gods as allegories for natural elements. Zeus stood for the sky, Hephaestus for fire. Jewish intellectuals applied the same method to scripture. The most prominent was Philo of Alexandria, a Jewish philosopher active around the time of Jesus, who systematically read the Torah's laws, tabernacle descriptions, and the priestly rituals as symbols pointing to deeper spiritual realities. The author of Hebrews works in exactly this tradition. The philosophical engine driving the sermon is a set of interlocking dualisms drawn from Platonist thought: real versus apparent, eternal versus temporal, spiritual versus physical, substance versus shadow. In Hebrews, these categories organize the entire argument. The old tabernacle worship, the sacrifices, the priesthood, the rituals prescribed in the Torah, belongs to the realm of shadow. It's a copy, a sketch, a preliminary draft. Jesus' priesthood belongs to the realm of reality and the eternal, the true, the final. This isn't decorative metaphor, it's the argumentative logic of the entire sermon. Every claim the author makes flows from this 2-tier framework. That dualism of shadow and reality powers a specific rhetorical form: syncresis. The word comes from Greek, syn, meaning with, plus crisis, meaning judgment. To judge one thing alongside another. In ancient rhetorical education, syncresis was a standard exercise, a formal compare and contrast argument. Students learn to place 2 subjects side by side and argue that one surpassed the other. Hebrews is a syncresis comparing 2 liturgia, 2 liturgies, 2 forms of sacred service. The Greek word liturgia meant more than a worship ceremony. It meant any act of public service, a wealthy citizen funding a festival, a priest performing a sacrifice, angels carrying out God's commands. Hebrews calls angels rhetorikoi, servants, in chapter 1. The entire sermon argues that Jesus' service surpasses every prior form of divine service. The synchresis unfolds in 3 ascending steps. Step 1. Jesus surpasses the angels, chapters 1 and 2. The author marshals a chain of some quotations originally addressed to the Davidic king and reads them as references to Jesus. The key move: God never said these things to any angel. Step 2. Jesus surpasses Moses and Joshua in chapters 3 and 4. Moses was faithful as a servant in God's house, but Jesus is faithful as the son over that house. The rest that Joshua could not fully deliver, Jesus provides. Step 3. Jesus surpasses the Israelite high priest, chapters 4 and 5. This is the culminating comparison. The high priest enters the earthly sanctuary once a year. Jesus enters the heavenly sanctuary permanently. Each step raises the stakes. Each step advances the central argument. Between these comparisons, the author weaves skillful digressions. The first introduces the mysterious Melchizedek, a priest-king from Genesis with no recorded genealogy, planting a seed that blooms into a full argument in chapter 7. The second is blunt. The author tells the audience to stop being babies drinking milk and prepare for the meat of advanced teaching. A brief mention of faithful examples at chapter 6, verse 12, foreshadows the great catalogue of the faithful in chapter 11, seeds planted early, harvested late. This is masterful oral composition. Step back and the entire architecture snaps into focus. The opening verses state the thesis. Long ago, God spoke to our ancestors in many and various ways by the prophets, but in these last days, he has spoken to us by a son. Old versus new, shadow versus reality. Every structural element serves the thesis, the 3-step synchresis, the digressions that foreshadow later arguments, the extended comparison of 2 liturgies, the chapter 11 Hall of Faith, the closing exhortation. Hebrews is not a loose collection of theological reflections, it's a unified, architecturally precise argument. Hebrews shows that the earliest Christian thinkers deployed the most advanced rhetorical and philosophical tools of their world, reading Hebrews as a synchresis, not a letter, not a random meditation, transforms the text. Right? And the authorship mystery points to something deeper. Someone in the early church produced the finest Greek rhetoric in the entire New Testament, and we have no idea who they were. As Origen said, God knows who the author of Hebrews is.